Nobody likes to be afraid. The more bold or contrarian amongst you might disagree with that, saying they relish fear, that they like the feeling, but this is inaccurate. They don't like the fear, they like what fear produces. They like staring down fear. They like the tension or chaos it creates after the fact. They like the time before or the time after, but right there in the thick of it, they're like everyone else in that being in a state of abject terror is something they would rather avoid in their day-to-day life. So then why is it one of the most popular genres of video game? Fear is a very broad category, and not all of these subsets are employed in games. As prevalent as it may be in our day-to-day life, not many games are made about the fear of peanut butter. Although now I am kind of tempted to make that. The most common type of fear used in games boils down to the fear of the unknown, mixed with psychological horror. Instill in the player that there is something out there, something that you do not understand, something malevolent, and it is coming for you. As a matter of fact, it's probably behind you right now. Let me walk you through some classics. If you asked most people to think of a horror game, the first thing that would pop to mind is none other than Five Nights at Freddy's. This is a horrendous example. Don't get me wrong, from a game development point of view, the FNAF series is stellar, with a well-deserved cult following, but it's not horror, not really. At least, that's not why you're afraid while playing it, and that's exactly why you keep coming back to it. The tension you feel while playing a Five Nights at Freddy's game is from a combination of adrenaline and helplessness, which, while executed very well, is essentially the same feeling conjured by sitting at the doctor's office waiting to receive a shot. The gameplay loop is simple: check cameras and listen close. When one of your senses tells you that you're in danger, shut a door, shine a light, or perform some other action to get back to a point of relative safety. There certainly are tried and true aspects of proper horror here. The feeling of helplessness, an unknown enemy that is at all times pursuing you, or at least gives the appearance of such, some means of protecting yourself that straddles the fine line where you essentially are invulnerable while using it, but can never truly eliminate the threat or be safe. So, why have I labeled it as essentially bargain bin horror? Simple. You're not afraid, you're surprised. The game employs one of the oldest tricks in the book: jump scares. Without warning, or perhaps with a small, useless bit of warning before the instant occurs, bombard the player's senses with bright lights and loud noises and then fade away. Spike the player's adrenaline only to leave them in the dark. The danger is past, the game is over. A cheap trick, purely playing off of your raw instincts for your self-preservation and aversion to surprises. It's not making you feel afraid, it's making you feel helpless. If you're not convinced of this, I'd like to point to what is considered one of the more tense moments in the classic games: running out of power. For those unfamiliar with the games, there's a mechanic in most of them that I have omitted until now: power. Shutting doors, using lights, whatever action you can do to protect yourself uses power. Use it all up, and the place goes dark, and afterwards you're left, well, powerless. You have no more control, nothing that you can do, no cameras to check. All the mechanics you've used up to this point are wrenched from you. All you can do is sit there in this newfound darkness and stare into the doorways you recently had barricaded and pray that you don't see. This isn't fear. It's helplessness. It's like sneaking up on a newborn. You might be exceptionally good at it, but then again, it's a newborn. It's not much of a challenge. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. The proper fear is more like spear fishing. Slow, patient, an ever-looming threat, but one that can be avoided if the fish is particularly slippery. I would like to reiterate that I like the FNAF series and am generally a fan of its creator, so, okay, yeah, go and remove that dislike, right? Moving on. There are lots of titles that conjure proper fear, but the game I would like to point to here is one of my personal favorites, SOMA. Now, those of you familiar with SOMA probably just slammed your hands down on the table, working yourself into a sweaty gamer rage, saying something along the lines of, "George, you bastard, you just spent 5 minutes talking crap about a game with dark, cramped spaces and animatronics brought to life with the souls of the deceased inside of them that are intent on killing you with lore far too deep to understand, and then you turn around and point at the exact same game but underwater. You are a fake gamer. The only reason you like SOMA and not FNAF is visual fidelity. You are a AAA shill, and I will have your gamer card removed by the High Council of Gamers." And you'd be correct if you weren't so incredibly wrong. Games don't have to be high budget or high fidelity to be scary, and they certainly don't have to be AAA. An indie horror game that came out recently, Faith, is a testament to that. I don't want to dig too far into that game here, but it's available on Steam, and I recommend you check it out. There is one chief difference between SOMA and FNAF, game structure aside. It's a simple concept, but it makes all the difference in the world. In FNAF, you sit still and the game comes to you. In SOMA, you have to go and do. Nothing is going to jump out at you, scream in your face, try to kill you, unless you resolutely march forward in the game. It's time and time again sticking your neck out and hoping it doesn't get cut off, but knowing there's a very real risk that it will be. In FNAF, or games akin to it that rely wholesale on jump scares, the game will spring these on you really regardless of what you do. The only difference you can make is if that particular jump scare results in a game over or not. However, I do have to give some credence to the devil advocates out there. An argument some of you are formulating, and have probably already typed in the comments, is that FNAF is a simple game made by one man with drastically different gameplay elements than SOMA, which is made by a larger, already established AAA studio. And this is a valid argument, but I want to stress, I am not here to criticize games that have already been made, but to guide the ones that have not. With that said, how do you implement fear into a game you might be making? Well, first up, as you may have noticed by now, I'm not terribly fond of jump scares from a game developer's standpoint, but that's not to say that surprise can't be used to frighten the player, but how to really bring the fear factor of your game is to not just shock your player's senses, but to unsettle their mind. Unravel what the player, and I mean the person actually playing, not the in-world character, knows to be true, and from there on out, you'll have them jumping at shadows. A perfect example of this comes from a game called Superluminal, and this is a perfect example, not because that Superluminal is a good horror game, but because it's not a horror game at all. Save for one part that is mildly a parody of horror and its environment style, there is no horror in Superluminal, not in the traditional sense. But what it excels at is upsetting one of the most basic things our brain holds to be true: perspective. Despite games being a 2D image on a screen, our brain is exceptional at rationalizing things like this and formatting them around our real world. And so it translates the fictitious depth created by modern-day rendering techniques and gives us a good understanding of space and depth in a world that is nothing more than ones and zeros. We've become so used to it that when a game comes along and turns all of that on its head in the manner that Superluminal does, it really begins to pull at our brain. And anyone who's played Superluminal would probably tell you two things. A, that it is by no means a scary game, but B, that there is some sense of unease you feel playing it almost the entire time. Take that feeling and add some malevolent force that wills your destruction, and you've got some proper fear. You want to replicate the combination of evil and baseline confusion that you get in dreams, when you're running as hard as you can and not going anywhere. You're trying your hardest to flee from something that wants your life, but your best efforts are ultimately, illogically, fruitless. You want to make a nightmare. I want to give a real quick and massive thank you to you for watching all the way through this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it, and I enjoy making this kind of video. And if you want to see more of this in-depth animated style rather than the quick devlogs I make, or I suppose I should say in addition to the devlogs I make, trust me, those aren't going to stop. Also, if you had any thoughts about the video or just want to say hello, drop a comment down below. I always enjoy reading them. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.